Good evening and welcome to episode 8 of Reading Between the Lineups. And as what has become per usual, Chuck8403, my hero, and I don't use that word lightly, is starting off the stream with 5 gifted subs. So welcome on into the clubhouse. J Roche 6, Rabbit 1779, Nick Waddick, Pete Drew D, and Slibbard, and a huge thank you to Chuck. You are the man. But what are we doing tonight? So we're at episode 8 of Reading Between the Lineups, and we are the show that gets to the person behind the Discord persona. You know, this game is a game of personalities. It's a game and community of real people who are coming from all walks of life, who are coming together to play this game that we all love, and everyone's doing it slightly differently. And everyone's finding different levels of success, and they're doing and finding that success in different ways and at different measures. And so this show really looks to get to understand who those people are and how they go about what they do and what their ambitions are, what their crowning achievements are, and really what they most get out of this game. I am your host, DRC. And we've got a great show for you tonight. We've got, as always, a 30,000 perfect point giveaway. So stick around to the end of the interview to be eligible for that. And then we've got the interview itself. So we've got Jesse. And Jesse Roche is not only a perfect league player now for 3 weeks running. He's made the playoffs in the last 2 seasons. Did not come away with hardware, but getting there is more than half the battle. And now is in his 3rd season. But in addition to being a top-level, out-of-the-park perfect team player, he's also a Dynasty Fantasy Baseball writer at Baseball Prospectus. And this episode that we've got for you guys tonight is truly a crossover episode. We are going to be talking about perfect team roster building. We're going to be comparing that to fantasy roster building. We're going to be talking about competing in perfect team and the different strategies that one can use. And of those strategies, which ones require more and less maintenance, we're going to be getting into all of that. But then we're also going to be going relatively deep on fantasy as well. We're going to be talking about how Jesse goes about identifying baseball prospects and how he goes about making rankings for those baseball prospects and really what makes up his process above and beyond seeing who's productive in the minor leagues. And we also talk some about how difficult it's going to be to make sense of what 2020 was. The short sprint of a baseball season in 2020. How are we going to be using the data that comes from that to inform our decisions as we build our fantasy teams for 2021? So we're spraying to all fields. We've got a meaty interview for you guys, and as such, I'm not going to take too long in the preamble here, but we do have one note to talk about tonight during Hit and Run, and that's Beam Me Up, Scotty. So I, DRC Nomads, will be broadcasting for the very first time on the mothership. And it will be starting on Sunday. And it will be broadcasting the Perfect League World Series. I've done that a number of times on my own channel. I believe we did 6 Perfect League World Series and have now done 2 or 3 DLL World Series. So it's been a Sunday ritual for me. And now it can be a Sunday ritual for everyone as well. So I'm super duper excited about it. I'm excited because normally we had a relatively smaller crew on Sundays as compared to this stream and as compared to our Thursday stream. It was a smaller, tighter knit group of people as we were going through the matchups and going through the coaching decisions that were being made for each respective World Series that we were broadcasting. And now we're going to have an opportunity to do that with a much larger audience and really bring some next level analysis and next level understanding of coaching decisions to a much broader audience. I'm very excited about that. And I also want to thank Rich and Chris. Both of them have been extremely supportive of everything that we've done on this channel, and there's no way that we'd be where we're at today without the guidance and support and encouragement of both of them. So again, hats off and huge kudos and huge thank you to both of them and Out of the Park in general for really helping the stream be what it has been able to be to this point. So I hope everyone here today that has not seen one of my Perfect Team World Series broadcasts in the past will join us on Sunday. The good news is drops will be enabled. Believe that. And that's a 3-hour broadcast. So we're talking about, if you jump in from the beginning, we're talking 9 packs every Sunday. So if that's not reason enough to get you out of bed and get you into the Out of the Park Twitch stream, I don't know what is. But in addition to that, I think that you guys will love the content. I think you guys will love the broadcast itself, and we should all have a lot of fun. And so let's take a look at our new updated broadcast schedule. So Thursdays will be as they always were on this channel, on this stream, on right after Chris goes off, I should say, as we analyze all the cards there. We play OK Boomer, OK Zoomer, and then we typically cap it off with some sort of special segment. And now Sundays will be on the mothership. So we'll be on Out of the Park's Twitch stream then. It typically starts around 6 p.m. Eastern, depending on how quickly the championship series go, and if the prior rounds have a series that goes to 7 games, that time can fluctuate some. So just keep your eye on your phone or your computer to get that notification that we've gone live, and then jump in there when you get a chance. And then on Tuesdays, we do this show, and I will be announcing next week's guest at the end of this stream. So with that said, let me darken the screen here, load up Jesse's interview, and we will be on our way. Joining me tonight on Reading Between the Lineups is Jesse Roche, the Perfect Team manager of the Richmond Rhinos, as well as a Dynasty Fantasy Baseball writer at Baseball Prospectus. How are you doing tonight, Jesse?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, certainly glad to have you in somewhat of a crossover episode, as I expect that we'll be talking a lot of Perfect Team, we'll be talking some real baseball, we'll be talking some fantasy. So I think this could be a fun show for us. So let's start off with a little bit about yourself, Jesse. So why don't you tell us about a little bit more about you so that we can know who you are.
All right, well, obviously, I'm Jesse Roche. I am a writer at Baseball Prospectus. I also am a co-host on a podcast hosted by Fantrax called the 5-Tool Fantasy Baseball Podcast with Eric Cross and Jake Devereaux. So you should definitely go check that out. It's a blast, mainly focused on Dynasty, but we do a lot of redraft as well. So I think it kind of covers all bases. In real life, I'm an attorney. I'm a work-at-home attorney these days. I'm based out of Charleston, South Carolina, with a loving wife and a young toddler.
Yeah, I can hear a little bit of that Southern accent just peeking through there just a touch.
Maryland. I'm a Maryland boy, actually. So it's been a journey from Eastern Shore, Maryland to Richmond, Virginia for a long time, hence the Richmond Rhinos, and then Greensboro, North Carolina. And there was actually a pit stop in San Antonio, Texas for a year. So slowly moving south from Maryland to Virginia to North Carolina and now South Carolina. And hopefully this is where we are for a while.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time growing up in Georgia, so I'm familiar with the climate there, and it's certainly not bad as compared to our winters that we get here in Chicago.
I don't think much compares to Chicago winters, man.
So, Jesse, let's dig in a little bit about your job with Baseball Prospectus. So you write for them. Tell us what you write about and really what you do for them, what your duties encompass.
Sure. So I am a fantasy baseball writer with a focus on Dynasty. So I do a lot of Dynasty rankings with Brett Sayer, basic Dynasty content. This year was this is my first year of Baseball Prospectus, and it, of course, falls in this shortened season and COVID. So it really confuses a lot of things. I think a lot of people, a lot of analysts, obviously a lot of fans and fantasy baseball players have been thrown a little bit. And I'm sure we're going to see the ramifications of this throughout this offseason and leading into next year, because people are going to be making crazy conclusions based on just a 60-game season. And I'm going to probably have to be making some interesting conclusions as well, just because, it's a sample. It's not a very large one, but it's what we have. And But yeah, that's roughly what I do for Baseball Prospectus. We put out top 500 rankings basically every other week during the season. Uh, and that should continue in the off season. We should be coming out with a top 500 soon. In January, we start our big positional series push, which will start with catchers and work all the way through relief pitchers. And it encompasses the months of January, February, and then we'll have a big rankings release in March.
So, Jesse, I know that I first started following your writing when you're at Dynasty Guru. Can you walk us through the path that took you to where you're at today with Baseball Prospectus?
Yeah, so I started with Dynasty Guru with a focus on prospects. It was just my passion at the time. I really wanted to write about prospects from a fantasy perspective. There wasn't a ton of content, I don't think, out there that I thought was clear, at least from. Obviously, since that point, there has been a lot. I know that there's Prospects Live does great work, Fantrax does great works. So, at that time, I wanted to try and do something a little different. So I did start with prospects focus, did top 200 prospect lists. I started with positional lists at Dynasty Guru. And over time, I worked into the top 500 dynasty rankings at the Dynasty Guru, which was always done by Brett Sayer, who was the creator of the Dynasty Guru, and he is one of the people in charge of Baseball Prospectus and close colleague of mine. And he kind of was, he definitely was influential in those rankings, and he still is. He still he still hounds me on some players. So the rankings that I put out for Baseball Prospectus are not just my opinion. It is a combined effort. But they are high. I like to have great faith in those rankings, and I, based on my experience in industry leagues and throughout the industry. So it's been an interesting journey from the Dynasty Guru. And my first article was about Austin Hayes, and then he crashed and burned for a year or two. It's been fun.
Yeah, it's quite the journey, and I definitely was tuning in when Brett was the head of the Dynasty Guru and on up to where he's at and where you're at today. And for anyone who hasn't checked it out, dynastyguru.com, I believe, is the domain there, and baseballprospectus.com, the other one. Definitely two very good publications. And if you've never played Dynasty Fantasy Baseball, honestly, I think that you're totally missing out. My league made the switch about a decade ago. We've been doing it for 8 years now, and it is just night and day in terms of the engagement, in terms of the investment, in terms of the connection you have with your players. But Jesse, why don't you for a second just sell those that might need to hear it on why they need to be playing Dynasty instead of a redraft fantasy baseball?
Well, honestly, you should play both. I actually think redraft does. I basically had given up redraft for a while, and since I began playing redraft again the last couple of years, and it has, colored my dynasty rankings. I think that if you don't play redraft, you can get a little bit too attached to youth in dynasty, and that is the danger in a lot of dynasty leagues. A player turns 30, and all of a sudden there's zero market for that player, which is ridiculous. But yeah, you should definitely play Dynasty. I cannot believe any person who plays OOTP does not play Dynasty Baseball. But there's a lot of different Dynasty formats. If you want something that's comparable to OOTP, simulation based, you can go check out Benchwarmer Baseball or Scoresheet, which has been around forever and is very popular. Of course, you could just do a standard 5x5 and do Dynasty that way. The great thing about Dynasty is that your season never ends. So after the season, trading begins. You can rebuild your roster during the season. If you see that your team isn't going to win that year, you can start looking to next year and start trading for picks. You can trade for players, young players, and just rework your lineup, your roster. It's something that it's engaging year round, and for any sport, really, for any sport, I'd recommend Dynasty, but baseball in particular, and really can get you focused on prospects early too. It increases your engagement in the game, I think, and your knowledge of the game. So highly, highly recommend Dynasty Baseball.
And as you do make that transition over into Dynasty Baseball, there's a number of resources available to you. The way that I actually first started interacting with Jesse was by bugging him on Twitter saying, hey, in an OBP league, do you like Tristan Casas or some other guy? And so Jesse was nice enough to put up with my player-by-player questions, and there's a number of folks that would be willing to do the same. So it's not like entering a completely unknown world devoid of resources. There's more and more fantasy baseball resources with each passing season, including more podcasts dedicated to that format as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of great resources out there, and I can just say I can attest that the community of industry writers is close, and they're all great, and just you can reach out to any of them, and they'll be responsive and get back to you. I know Eric Cross, like I mentioned before, he's fantastic at Fantrax. I like Prospects Live. All of them have been great, and it's a great community. Get involved. There's a ton. If you ever have any questions, you can always reach out to me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is JAROCHE6. Just to reach out to me. I have my messages open, so you can just message me anytime, and I'll try and get back to you as quickly as possible. This goes really like I said, it's a close-knit community, and everyone is very receptive, and you can get multiple responses from multiple experts if you want, or experts.
So Jesse, you mentioned your first article was the Austin Hayes piece, and Austin Hayes didn't turn out to be what maybe he could have been. Now, what is your favorite piece or your favorite article you've ever put together?
I've read a lot of articles. This year was a little slower because of COVID and just life, but my favorite one was probably an article I wrote at the Dynasty Guru about Juan Soto when he debuted. I really liked that piece. It wasn't necessarily the most analytical piece of all time, but it was a fun one to write. It was short notice write-up that we wanted to get out right away because it was a somewhat surprising move for the Nationals calling Soto up that year. And that was a real blast to write. Recently, I did a piece of Baseball Prospectus that when the season was delayed, we were trying to find ways to create content that would be interesting for our readers. So we had a series where a lot of us wrote about our first Dynasty baseball experience or fantasy baseball experience. And I wrote about my first one, which was through Scoresheet, which I mentioned before. And that was a ton of fun to write and just try and figure out, go back and search for the first records I had of my team way back then, and some of my early trade communications, and it was just kind of fun to see that because a lot of us have been playing for a very long time, and just going back and seeing those early iterations of your rosters is pretty fun.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've learned a little bit now about Jesse, the author. Now let's talk about Jesse, the perfect team player. So is this your first year playing out of the park?
It is. Obviously, the delayed season, I needed to fill the gap, and I can give credit to Paul Sporer. Some of his articles over at Fangraphs and some of his videos intrigued me, and some of the writers over at Baseball Prospectus were doing a simulated season with out of the park baseball. So all of that, for Paul Sporer in particular, his perfect team articles got me into OOTP, and from there, it's been a blast. It's been a crazy learning curve. And I will say that I had a lot of hiccups and bumps along the road. Not the most efficient build at all. And, I think that if you're starting OTP for the first time, you really need to, seek out resources like the Discord channel, like channels on Discord, like these streams, and try to, seek out this expert advice, because these guys do great work. I've sought out their advice regarding roster construction and certain players. They gather tons and tons of data, and they do a ton of work, and not work that I do enough of. So, it's been a blast. It's been definitely a first year learning experience.
So you mentioned that it's been quite the journey. Well, you're in perfect now, so that journey has landed in a good spot. And really, what has that journey been like? What were some of the key waypoints that you hit during that journey?
All right. Well, at some point over the summer, I made it to Diamond for the first time, and I got destroyed. Got relegated back to Gold. This was as pure free to play at that point. Free to play that had not efficiently spent perfect points or even generated perfect points. I was running like Strasbourg as a starter way back then. It did not go well. Obviously, I was before Face of the Franchise, before a lot of the Team of the Decades. So some of the more powered cards had not arrived yet. But even still, I had not built my roster efficiently. I'd spent big on someone like Mike Schmidt, who is not playable in any way, shape, or form. Mm-hmm. The only use I actually really got out of him was completing Face of the Franchise.
Right.
Very expensive piece for that. But yeah, that was a big turning point. Once I hit Diamond and saw how teams were constructed, I was like, wow, okay, I'm not doing this right. I went and looked at Perfect Team for the first time, Perfect League for the first time, and saw some of those rosters, and I was like, oh, okay. All right. So at that point, I began also realizing that maybe missions were important. So a little late to the game on that. My main roster, I did not complete the live card missions for a long time, which is obviously a massive mistake. Yeah, that was the big turning point for me, hitting Diamond and getting relegated, and then realizing that things needed to change for that team. And it was a slow process, but it's gotten me here, so it's worked out.
And so you took a peek at Perfect. You took a peek at the teams that were competing in the Diamond Leagues you were in. And what observations were you making, either specifically to the types of cards that were being played or the overall strategic alignment of lineup construction and pitching staff construction and roles? Like, what really did you pick up on through that observation?
Well, the main thing I think I picked up on was contact, that all the teams were carrying high contact players. That power did not seem to be a carrying stat for teams, not a carrying trait for players, that they're not very common among the top teams, top players. Not saying that they were without power, but players like Lloyd, like Roger Connor way back then, they were players that showed up on all these successful teams, and someone like a Mike Schmidt was on none of them. Who's basically just a power patience guy. I realized early that at that point I realized that contact was important. So I started targeting high contact players. And then the next real big thing I think I realized was, okay, contact is somewhat meaningless unless there's a void case that goes with it. In a lot of cases. It's not always the case, but in most cases that's the case. So that was my next big epiphany, I think, from a hitting perspective. For pitching, it really was about control. Pitchers that had sub 80 control are unusable for the most part. Maybe they can have a niche in the bullpen, but they're not starters. They can't be, unless some kind of RNG fluke happens in which they actually can avoid walking everybody. But yeah, I had one of my big purchases early also was Fernando Valenzuela. And he did okay in Diamond for a while, but I mean, that control is just not going to cut it. I think it's like 81, 82 overall. And those were the big things. Those three, contact, avoid Ks, and control. Those were three things that I thought that I didn't quite realize were as important as they were.
Absolutely, and that really mirrors my path to some extent. I play in an OBP fantasy league, and so I've never cared about batting average. So what does batting average matter? All I want is for someone to get on base a ton. I want them to slug a ton when they make contact, and if they've got a 30% K percentage, fine. What do I care? Just get me
Mike Schmidt, man.
Yeah. And so that was that same learning curve that I had to go on. That's one of the big deviations between fantasy and really reality in the Perfect Team universe, that you can't be successful as a low contact hitter, unless you're bringing a just absolutely ridiculous contact rating like a Roberto Clemente, face of the franchise, and even that has diminishing returns as the power creep continued.
Yep. Yeah, it's yeah, it's been a thing that, I know that certain people value I very highly still. And I, to me, is just one of those stats that ultimately, unless I comes with very high avoid Ks, I turns into tons and tons of strikeouts.
Mm-hmm.
And that means less balls in play, and that means that player is just going to be worthless. Just look at what's happened to Babe Ruth throughout this entire game cycle.
Mm-hmm.
Even superpowered Babe Ruth, the peak Babe Ruth, is not a player that anyone's playing in perfect for the most part. He's not a player that is played too often in Diamond even. I am super tempted to grab him and put him in lefty cheese and see what happens. I don't know if anyone's really done that and found success though. So
yeah, so how much does the perfect team roster building and strategizing, like some of what we're talking about now, scratch that same itch that fantasy scratches for you?
I think that for me, it scratches an itch that I've had since I was young, because I started with Ep.8 way back before fantasy, which is a card game with dice, and that I'm sure a lot of OOTP players actually do have experience with that, or something like Stratomatic. It scratched that itch, being able to manage your roster, maybe not as hands-on as Ep.8 is, since it's basically like at bat by bat, but it gives you that kind of management. You can set your lineup, set your rotation. Obviously, you can use the sliders to try and control how the AI decides to manage your team, which to mix results in success, because who knows what the AI will do sometimes. But that's the main thing. I think for fantasy, it's very different, because in fantasy, the big difference between that and OOTP is that no one has the same card in fantasy. You're a player. Like in normal fantasy leagues, in most fantasy leagues, each player is owned by one owner. But in OOTP, you're going to see every single team will have Pedro in perfect. Every single team, just about. I mean, there are teams in perfect that do not have Pedro, but you're going to see the same players on countless teams, and it's all about just trying to find that edge in lineup construction, in park factors, in the sliders, in how you manage or micromanage your team, to try and just get that like small advantage over your competition, because there'll be times where you're going to be facing something that's like almost the exact same lineup, exact same rotation at times. This was a big problem, I thought, early on in the game cycle, when you would see teams that would have basically identical of the Diamond SC rosters, or identical live card reward centric rosters. Everyone would have that 99 Maddox, they would have that 99 Yastrzemski, and I don't know how I feel about that. I mean, I think that I do really like the way that the reward missions for the most part have been structured. So I'm not going to complain much about that. But I think that that's the big deviation between OOTP and fantasy, is that this is more like a salary cap build in, where anybody can get any player, just have to have the amount of money to acquire them within your budget. But, so that's why like a lot of the special editions that come from tournaments are very fun and, are highly sought after, because there are rare cards. And, I have Lefty Grove, for example, who I'm still holding on to, and I may sell. If you want Lefty Grove, talk to me. I may sell him. So, but it's fun to have a player that not many people have.
Did your investment in fantasy go down a bit after discovering Perfect Team, or just in general due to COVID?
Yes. COVID threw everything for a loop. I have a young child. He turned one in March. So he actually turned one on St. Patrick's Day. He's a St. Patrick's baby. So that happened right as COVID really took hold. and we took him out of daycare and had him at home. And obviously the Major League Baseball season got delayed. And so everything was thrown through a loop. I had to, trying to balance family life, work, and trying to do fantasy. Obviously the one thing that takes a backseat to all that is going to be fantasy. And also, we moved. I moved from Greensboro, North Carolina to Charleston in June. So we were selling our house, buying a house, and moving, and all that stuff. So yes, fantasy took, and obviously OOTP kind of cut into some of the fantasy stuff I wanted to do. So fantasy did take a bit of a backseat for me this year, unfortunately. But I'm hoping everything gets back to normal soon. And it'll be interesting to see how to balance OOTP with the fantasy obligations that I have.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm in the same boat with you there. I know that I personally invest a gargantuan, or at least used to invest a gargantuan amount of time into my fantasy baseball league. I shared with you that league preview that I put together for the league.
How many pages was that? That was crazy.
I think it was like 60 plus. But it's definitely a passion, and like the way that I engage in hobbies and the way that I engage in things that I like to do is to like go all in and to create Excel spreadsheets and to create layers of analysis and to create an almanac and to like make it come to life. And I've brought so much of that to Perfect Team. And next year, if we do get a regular baseball season, which fingers crossed, hopefully we do, it'll be that same thing that you mentioned, just weighing how much attention goes where, because we're really going to be kicking off both of them at the same time. I'm sure the busiest time for you is probably that fantasy baseball draft time, and that's coincidentally the same time that PT22 would be launching.
Yeah. I mean, there's March in general, and everything leading up to March. It's a very, very busy time. We're going to be putting out articles, intensive articles and rankings on a weekly basis at Baseball Prospectus, beginning in January, and leading all the way through March. And then obviously the baseball season happens, and we're going to be dealing with spring training and trying to cover all that and all the news that we get and live looks that hopefully live looks we're getting on players. Meanwhile, I'm going to be trying to get to games too early in the season. Hopefully, unfortunately, Yankees pulled out of Charleston, so Charleston's got an open affiliate as far as I know right now. It's a beautiful place and a beautiful park, so I imagine they're going to land somebody, so I'm just waiting to hear who that is. But I hope to get to a lot of games as well, so get into games, writing about it. I hope to continue, I hope to get back into the daily prospect work that I do as well. On Twitter, and just being able to track everything on a daily basis, as well as doing OOTP and working and being a father and husband. It's we'll see how it ends up working out. I've actually decided I am cutting some of my fantasy teams. I'm going to be in hopefully less leagues, but it's tough. It's tough trying to figure out what to cut, and because cutting anything is painful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of people are in that same time crunch as they're looking at the various things that they really deserve their attention. So jumping back to... Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think I can probably manage when I'm doing my fantasy-centric, writing and work. I can probably manage in the corner of my eye, keeping track of my team and making sure my team's functional in OOTP. But I don't know if I'll be able to find as much success in Perfect League because that requires some intense micromanaging to really stay afloat.
Absolutely, and that's exactly what I wanted to talk about next. So your Perfect League stay, you're now 2 weeks in. You've made the playoffs this week, so you're going to sign up for a third week next week. Let's first start with your first week in Perfect, where you ran a fully juiced park, which I almost never see. Why did you do that?
Yeah, I think I ran it partly because no one does it. There's a reason why no one does that, right? Fully juiced park, you don't necessarily get an advantage over anybody. It's a neutral park in a way. What the reason I decided to do that was, one, I had been doing it. So I had been doing it through Diamond, partly because in Diamond, you're going to be facing teams that you can just overwhelm with, a good team and good lineup. And your pitching should weather the storm anyway, even in the fully juiced park. So, and, for fully juiced and for Max O, that's something that a lot of people advocate early on in the game, when you're just starting too, because it's a way to generate perfect points through achievements. So when I came to Perfect League, I thought, well, no one's going to be doing it. And I don't have Ozzie Smith. I don't have Pop Lloyd. I don't have a lot of the defensive focused players that do not hit for any power. And just are not good hitters, not very good hitters in general. They're not going to be doing much with the bat, period. I don't run Tris Speaker, for example. I favor offense over defense with my build. So what I decided to do was to lean into it in that first week, and it worked well. I'd like to think. I made the playoffs, so that's always my only goal, really, in Perfect League. Make the playoffs to live and fight another day. And when you get to the playoffs, as in any league for the most part, anything can happen. But once I did get to the playoffs, I realized, well, it is nice to have that home field advantage that a cheese park gives you, where you can build your roster for the most part to favor your home park and know how to play in it and be able to hopefully win more games there than you lose. But I do miss the fully juiced, because I did not do fully juiced this week. The week I did do fully juiced, I set Perfect League records in runs scored, slugging percentage, and OPS, and I had I tied for home runs. So it was a fun week of lots of hitting, but of course my pitchers were all terrible, and I don't know. It just wasn't something that I thought was going to take me to that next step, which is to win Perfect League. And so this week I went to righty cheese. So, and I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do next week, but I'll probably do righty cheese again. I feel like it's a good setup, sorry for going on here, but, with righty cheese, what I love about it is that in your home park, you can just say, put all your lefties out there. I don't even want to micro sometimes. I don't have to use pseudos necessarily. I can just let Pedro fly against a bunch of lefties and say, well, I think I'll be okay, because lefties shouldn't be able to hit very well in my park. There's a lot of the top starting pitchers in Perfect Team are right-handed. So, we've got Pedro, Walter Johnson, Tom Seaver, Greg Maddux, which are four of the most common you're going to see in rotations. And then there's, the more niche ones that some people have, like Schoolboy Rowe or Houston. But, since most of the best arms and reliable arms are right-handed, I feel like there's a reason why righty cheese is often a preferred, way to set your park factors. I know you run lefty cheese, right?
Yeah, so since I've come back down to Diamond, I've been experimenting a touch. I've done one of the last 3 years with my tried and true lefty cheese, and that was the 1 year I made the playoffs. So maybe I need to get back to basics. But yeah, my whole Perfect League run and the Diamond run that got me into Perfect was all lefty cheese.
Yeah, I mean, I think lefty cheese it's a fun one to do. I know that there's some people who get really, really greedy and try to use lefties to force right-handed lineups in a lefty cheese park against right-handed followers. But man, that's it. I feel like lefty cheese is one of those setups that requires the most maintenance and the most micromanaging, because, for the most part, lefty starters are not very good. There's Warren Spahn.
End of list.
Yeah, there's not a lot of other ones I would even trust in the rotation. There's some guys that are fine, but luckily a lot of the newer missions have been giving us lefty starters, not not that they're like anything to write home about, but they're serviceable. They're guys that maybe aren't going to kill you, like Andy Pettit, even Madison Bumgarner. Just because of that control, you're not necessarily going to get. If you can put him in the right situation, he can thrive. And then most recently, we have Steve Carlton, who you're not going to probably ever want to put in the rotation, but he's another lefty that gives you a lot of flexibility, I think. And I wouldn't be surprised if we may see one or two more.
Yep, and that's exactly what I did. Is I got greedy with it, and you try to lefty open and righty follow and get the double dip.
Yep.
You get all righties in the lineup in a ballpark with with right-handed pitcher on the mound, totally nerfing it out. So you're getting every stackable bonus you can.
Yeah, the thing is, then you hit teams that will just 7-day lineup you to hell, and just like, okay, you're going to be doing that. Well, I'm just going to put lefties in the lineup, and if you decide to outmaneuver me and just run someone like Madison Bumgarner, then so be it.
Yep.
Because even in that situation, Madison Bumgarner isn't as good as a lot of the ready arms that they would normally be facing. So I don't know. It's one of those strategies that I've thought about, but I just never have had the, I guess, cojones to actually decide to run the balls to do it.
Yeah, I'll agree with you that the lefty cheese build, in my opinion, is a lot higher maintenance because you have to make those calls and you have to anticipate when someone is going to 7-day you or just throw out a bunch of lefties and then try to catch them in that trap by running a traditional David Price through a lineup full of 7 lefties. And when you do it right, you feel like a king. And, you obviously win that game more often than not. But if you're not paying attention sim to sim, then lefty cheese is really hard to pull off.
Yeah, I think there's some ways you can do it. Just I think that there are certain people in Perfect League that have a method of doing it without as much maintenance as I think API even. I think his method of lefty cheese, I'm pretty sure he runs lefty cheese, doesn't involve as much maintenance as others, but I might not be right here.
No, you're on it.
You could always just set your lefties to a pitch count and just run it into a righty pen, and but even still, I don't know. The big risk there is that, well, at least in Perfect, your schedule's often set up where you have a ton of games in a row, and there are not many off days. So you're going to destroy your bullpen. So even then, you have to micromanage to rotate arms in and out.
Yeah, if you haven't picked up on it by this point in the interview, winning in Perfect is a beast unto itself and requires a lot of strategy and planning. And there are those that get away without it. We have people that brag about how little time they spend thinking about it or how little adjusting they're doing with their lineup. And if that works for them, then more power to them. But for people like API, for myself, sounds like you're kind of in the same camp. It's an active management that really allows you the opportunity to stick around.
Yeah, I think that you can get away with not being active if you either have lucked into an awesome roster build or you've spent a lot of money. There are some people who are excellent managers and owners, and they have taken advantage of the market. They've done a lot of speculating and built their bankroll that way, and they haven't invested a lot of actual real world money into their roster, and they still have excellent teams. And then you're going to see those teams and those owners in Perfect League, and they can probably, if you're really, really, really good and have really done this efficiently from day one, you can get away with not having to micro. But even still, why I think often microing still gives you an edge. Or at least just paying attention, but big problem is it's just really hard to do that week to week. And it's really hard to do that, hour to hour, it's just difficult.
Yeah. As Mac Jacks put it on our interview a couple weeks back, time has become the most precious resource to the out of the park manager. Those who have the most time to put in are seeing great results when they're able to do that in a way that that fosters their team building and fosters their overall success. So, in what ways would you say that building a perfectly competitive team is similar to fantasy team building, and how is it different? I think we've touched on a couple of those different ways, in that there's only one copy per team in fantasy, whereas in Perfect League, you've got 30 page rows. But have you found or bumped across any other similarities or differences that stood out to you?
Like I said, I think that the biggest, for me, my first experiences in fantasy or in Dynasty were in simulation formats like Score Sheet. So it has a lot of the same aspects of a sim-based fantasy, but for something like a 5x5 and roster building for something like that versus OOTP, I don't really see a huge. There's not a lot of crossover. Other than you're just dealing with a lot of baseball players. I think the biggest crossover is you're targeting players that contribute in certain areas. Like in a fantasy league, if you're doing 5x5, you're going to want to make sure, it depends. You may say, okay, I'm going to, just, give up on stolen bases. I'm not even going to target stolen bases. Or you can just go heavy. You realize you need all these categories. You need to cover average, home runs, RBIs, runs, stolen bases, and try and target them with at different positions. In out of the park baseball, you can't really get away with giving up on any of the big things, right? So you can't really get away with giving up punting on defense at any one position. Maybe you can be like, okay, I'm going to punt in left field and run someone like Musial, for example, in left field. I'm going to punt at catcher and run King Kelly there, which a lot of people still do. You can do that, and I think that's maybe the biggest similarity. Where you may want to punt and where you may want to focus your efforts and your roster build. Other than that, I think the biggest similarity might be in the auction house and trying to catch players who are going to, a lot of speculation, for example. You catch players who are going to increase in value, appreciate in value through missions, and trying to, sell off players before they depreciate. And in fantasy, in Dynasty in particular, you're often doing that, right? You're targeting prospects who are going to be potentially boom, being a boom and to your value. And, maybe you can then flip them right after they've debuted, which is often, there are certain analysts in the Dynasty community who that's like their MO. They think that you want to have, they often think the time where the prospect's at its peak value is right after they debut and find success, or right when they debut in general. And for some players, that is definitely true, but that's not by any means something that I would necessarily abide by. But yeah, for Perfect Team, that's similar. A lot of people were targeting diamonds for teams in face of the franchise before the next missions got released, and once they got released, they would sell them like right away at double their value or triple. There was a lot of money made through speculation in this game. That's not something that I did much of, which is maybe if I play next year, which I anticipate I will, that I will maybe try and target a little bit more speculating, make sure I have a bankroll that actually can support it, and be aware of depreciating assets. Basically, once you complete a mission, if a mission's just been released, you complete a mission, you get that big reward. Often it may be just best to sell it right away and get that, because there's not a lot of those cards out there, get that big rarity, boost to the value, and then buy back in like a week when the value's tanked.
That's a really interesting connection you make there, that the Dynasty prospect correlation to Perfect Team is really the auction house value of a given card. And that really segues right into the next question that I had for you, and that Investing into appreciating talent or appreciating assets and disposing those expiring assets is like one of my favorite parts of Dynasty Fantasy Baseball. You know, finding the 18-year-old who's yet to play stateside ball but has a clean swing and a bunch of tools that you can dream on becoming the next stud. And I always felt like Perfect Team was missing that there was no element of being able to catch the next great thing before it was the next great thing. But I think that you have very, very well here reasoned that is auction house speculation.
Yeah, I think that you can't, OOTP and a Perfect Team is nothing like fantasy, in my opinion, in a lot of ways. I think if you're going to parallel them, I think that where you're looking at getting players that are appreciating value, that is really those auction house buys. Same thing with depreciating value. If you're seeing someone who's maybe going to have, for example, a mission topper come out that is going to be, a player that you already own. Like if you have Legend DiMaggio and New York Yankees are about to drop, maybe you didn't think it would be DiMaggio. A lot of people probably didn't think it would be DiMaggio. This is probably not the best example, really.
That's okay. Chaos Demon was quite certain it was a bad choice.
And if you're like the Orioles, for example, and you had Legend Cal, and you knew the face of the franchise topper was going to be Cal, that you should be selling Cal at that point. Even if he's producing for you, you need to sell him because his value will never be what it was. And now you can get all those players for like $50K.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
And they're still useful pieces.
And I'm sure the budget teams and the teams working their way up now, I'm sure they don't mind being able to get a 100 Cal for 35K or 40K or whatever it is. So talking about,
I've one of those teams.
Yeah. So you've got an alt running?
I do have an alt running, yeah. I've completed Face of the Franchise and that with that alt.
Wow.
Free to play alt that I actually started that as a live card only alt. I wasn't even intending to do what I've done with it, but yeah, live card only alt, where I just let the bank build and I bought a bunch of packs and cycled through them, sold off everything of value and just kept the low, kept the non-live irons, bronze, silvers, and I would sell all the others because that was when I started that was the beginning of the live card updates. So that was the middle of Face of the Franchise. So a lot of those like golds and diamonds were carrying a lot of value. So, but doing a live card build was fun for a while, but live card only teams like stagnated bronze and silver. So, but yeah, I was able to complete all Face of the Franchise free to play with a live card only build without even, that is not even the most efficient way of doing it because you can generate tons of perfect points with other builds at the lower levels. So I know that there's other owners that have been that are in Perfect League this past week who are free to play, haven't even been around that long. I know the Marksman, for example, free to play team. I think he's like 12 weeks old, that team, 13 weeks old. And I mean, just look at that roster. It's wild. It's better than mine, really.
As we continue to
forever.
As we continue to compare the real life baseball with Perfect Team baseball, how do you feel the in-game run environment and play style differs from real life?
I think that Out of the Park Baseball does a pretty good job of mimicking everyday life, or real baseball. I think that the way in which I think we've already touched upon it, the way in which plays doesn't necessarily work well in Perfect Team. I think it works well in normal sims through Out of the Park Baseball. Like if you're doing a 2020 season sim, I think the way that their ratings have been set up does bring a relatively accurate portrayal, in my opinion, of how those players may perform. How it works, though, on the broader scale of Perfect Team, I think can be a little flawed, as we've, as where power and eye are just not as valuable as it maybe that they would be in real life, or how they actually work in real life. that's I think that's I think the biggest difference for me. But I do, and I think that a lot of the way the ratings work is is favored to the modern game. So I think that's why the modern Sims work a little better than the older Sims.
Hmm.
If you're simming an older season, I think that it might be a little wonky, the way in which the ratings actually work. Even if it's a blast. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've simmed the 1927 Yankees.
That's true grinding
Uh,
there. Hitting those what are they called? Challenge packs?
yeah, I haven't done them as much lately, but yeah, for a long time. That's kind of what you have to do as free to play. Kind of grab those packs when you can.
Hmm. So moving a bit over to prospecting here, did you get a kick out of the Future Legend content series?
I did. I did. I know that some are not fans of that series, but I really did enjoy it. I think it's fun to see, an interpretation of what these players might become.
Hmm.
And there's a lot of fun cards, and I think that, you know, there's a lot of actually pretty super powered cards that are, in the lower classes too, which make them, intriguing cards to use even in tournament play.
Yeah, and I think Wander Franco came out of the gates as like a perfect league
Hmm.
caliber card at multiple positions. So there
Yep.
was definitely some use, at least early on in the game meta. Now, what was your favorite Future Legend card of them all? Whether it was for, perfect team reasons or otherwise.
Well, for me, it's for perfect team reasons, and I think Brendan McKay. Brendan
Hmm.
McKay is just fun. An 88 gold card who's a two-way player because were not many two-way players for a long time, and extremely useful card for for tournament play, and of course after the Tampa Bay mission
Hmm.
dropped, an extremely valuable card if you decide to sell him. So he's probably been my favorite. I know Alec Thomas is also like a card that I love that just is very useful for tournaments as well. And I think the Wander Franco cards are a lot of fun as well. If you can still make the defense,
Hmm.
I think that card really will perform through Diamond. And I think it could do okay in Perfect. I think well, not anymore probably, but
Yeah.
like as you said, for a long time it was a card that played in Perfect.
Of the players that are represented by Future Legend cards within the game, which of those real life players do you think will have the best career in Major League Baseball?
Well, I I don't want to do the easy one, which I do think Wander Franco will have the best career of all those players. I think he's a safe bet to be good, just because he's a switch hitter. Uh, he's a middle infielder. While he may not stick at shortstop long term, I think that bat is just going to play. A lot of people give it an 80 grade hit tool,
Hmm.
and it's a special bat. And there's a lot more power there than he has shown in the minors. He's going to be good, and I really do think he'll immediately establish himself as the next big thing, and that's why you'll see him ranked highly in most dynasty rankings.
Hmm.
Uh, Other than Wander Franco, I hate to bet on any pitching, just because pitching's
Right.
so you never know what's going to happen. For fantasy baseball, for dynasty baseball in particular, there's an acronym called TINSTAP, which stands for there is no such thing as a pitching prospect, because pitching prospects blow out their arms. There's just all kinds of things that happen to pitchers. I mean, I was a pitcher in college, growing up, and man, it's pitching is baseball in general is hard. Pitching is one of the hardest things you can do in baseball, and it is a physically grueling thing, an activity to do. And it really is just certain players. I mean, certain people have gift, but even if you have the gift, it's not going to get you there. So, um, yeah, I think pitchers I just wouldn't bet on in general from all those cards. But other than that, I'd say, man, I really do think Gavin Lux is going to be very good. He'd be the other guy that I would pick. He's had a very rough, shortened season, but I have trouble really buying into struggles for a lot of the young prospects or a lot of young players in general in a shortened season. Players who just haven't had a lot of major league experience, because you're not only are you dealing with this shortened major league season, this weird summer training, and expedited schedule, but you're dealing with empty stadiums, no video. There was no dughouse. There's no video for players to watch. JD Martinez, for example, infamously, that was a big problem for him. Like, that was how he made adjustments throughout the game and how he sustained success. And without that video, because of the Astros, you blame the Astros for that. I think that hurt a lot of young players too. And so Gavin Lux's struggles, I'm not sinking him at all for that. I think it was a blip on the radar. I do believe in his hitting ability, and I think he's going to be a stud.
So why don't you pull back the curtain just a touch on your player evaluation process? So how does Jesse Roche go about scouting a prospect?
Okay, well, oftentimes when I scout, and I will say that as a scout in particular, I am still new to the game. There are a lot of people, specifically at Baseball Prospectus, there's a lot of very, very good seasoned scouts that write and work at Baseball Prospectus and are part, and they're a big part of our prospect coverage there. And at a lot of other websites, I know Chris Blessing he's at a Baseball HQ. He's been very instructive for me as I've gotten more and more into scouting. I played for a long time. I played in college, not at the very high level, but I think just playing the game for as long as I have, I've picked up obviously some things. I was a pitcher, so I think for me, scouting pitchers is easier. It's also easier to scout pitchers because you can measure velocity. You can measure a lot of different things visually, and with tools that are available to more, to the lay folk. For hitters, there are a lot of ways to measure, hitting, exit velocity and launch angle and all that now. But that's still not going to be readily available to regular people. Not going to be available for minor league baseball games, for example. But yeah, for pitching, I will look at composure of the pitcher, because I think that's important. Because you have to have. There's a lot of different ways that you can find success at pitching, but you have composure on the mound. There are people like Brady Singer who are incredibly fiery, and that's another thing. You have to have that killer instinct. That's something that not a lot of people. That's something you can't really see in stats. That's something that's scouting specific. I think how a player handles themselves on the mound, and in the game in general, how hitters handle themselves is very important in how they may find success, because baseball is a psychological game. After that, I think for pitching, you kind of have to look at mechanics, and how if the pitcher is able to repeat them, how they're releasing and hiding their pitches, how what type of delivery they're having, whether that delivery is going to stress their arm in any way, shape, or form. Then, of course, obviously the pitches themselves, what kind of movement they're getting, how they're commanding the pitch. And that's, I think, that something that's very understated for pitching in general is command, because you could be throwing 98 miles an hour, but if you cannot locate that pitch within the zone, you're going to have trouble. I mean, just look at Dylan Cease, who throws gas, but just the command's not there. So that fastball, which has, 70, 80 grade velocity, plays probably like a 30, 40 pitch in the bigs right now, just because his command's not there. And that's the same thing with the off speed. How often are they able to, locate and get the type of break they want from all those pitches? And how hitters are reacting to those pitches. So pitching scouting, I think, is important too. It's also important to just track each and every pitch, right? Pay a lot of attention to the tiny details when you're scouting, and even at the time, if it's not clicking, when you go back and review video of it, or if you go back and review your notes of it, something may click and you may be like, okay, this is where this pitcher really is special, where they find success. This pitch in particular is fantastic because of X, Y, and Z. And I love scouting pitching. It's like, this is a thing I love to do at a baseball game because I was a pitcher, so I'm often very, very jealous of all these young players who are so much more talented than me. But it's fun to see how they do. But yeah, for hitting scouting, it's a whole different animal. I'll just briefly touch on it here, but it's how clean the swing is, as you mentioned before, but how quick their bat is. Bat speed is super important for scouting and for how well this player will do. How the sound of the ball off the bat. I mean, that's a real thing that you can hear and visually see, and that matters. I think the load and how they adjust to off speed pitches. Often I really love seeing players that have a simple short stroke that's fat, obviously with excellent bat speed, hopefully, and that's one that's got some loft to it. Because the modern game, you want to have players that put the ball in the air, and I want to see a player be able to take the ball the other way, and it's hitting is another thing. It's just it's composure too, because more often than not, a hitter is going to fail. You're going to get out. If you get on base 4 out of 10 times, that's a massive success. If you get a hit in 3 out of 10 at bats, I mean, that's awesome. But I mean, that's a lot of failure. So, seeing how a player handles that, see how they hustle, there are only a finite number of things you actually can measure with a hitter too. There's obviously speed. You can see the home to first times. You can measure some of their first to third times. But even then, you might not have a lot of great opportunities for that. So a lot of it is just the small details. You just have to kind of take note of all of them and try and do the sum of the parts for these players. But and also you just need a lot of looks on these guys. You're going to see scouts jump. I think sometimes people jump to way too many. They jump to conclusions off of very limited samples of seeing a player, right? Because you see a player, catch a player at a bad week, and you can you can just make wrong conclusions. And that's, I think, the real big problem with scouting and the big difficulty with it, right? So that's why a lot of people who do it very well have contacts that have seen these players a lot. And I think that's the thing, is you have to be willing to trust other people, find people you can trust and can trust their opinions, and try and get that information from them. And there's a lot of those people on Twitter and a lot of the people in the industry. Like I said, it's a tight-knit community, and they're most of the time they're very willing to share what they've observed.
Yeah, you went into a ton there, so a ton to break down. But I think
sorry about that.
No, it's good. It's so meaty. I just want to take it one bite at a time here. But I think the phenomena of a scout just seeing someone in a bad spot or a bad moment and that coloring their view. I want to say it was Keith Law, and he said that every time he went and saw Luis Robert, he would go 0 for 9 for the weekend. And while he wasn't entirely ruling him out as an elite prospect by any means, he just had no luck in being able to see him at any time when he was actually displaying the traits that made him the mega prospect that he was. And I think that one of the key similarities between much of what you just mentioned as far as what you do in your scouting process is outside of what box scores can capture. And so there's a term that's thrown around on Twitter in the prospecting world that's almost used as a negative, called a box score scout. And don't be a box score scout, and don't just look at the triple slash and triple A and think that you know anything. And so what stats and how do you layer the stats on top of everything else that you already mentioned, which was much more of an eyes-on physical observation? How do the stats play into your process, and what are the specific stats that you feel like do carry weight to some degree?
All right, so all stats need to be taken within context. In what level were they produced at? what was the competition like? What was the home park like? How old was the prospect when he did it? And obviously all of it needs to be taken in context of what the scouts are saying about this prospect too. Because you're going to see some players put up huge numbers who just, you know, are not special. Yeah, they don't have the bat speed that can handle the type of pitching you're going to see at the major league level. They don't have the raw speed to actually maintain the stolen bases that they are accruing in the lower levels. So in general, for stats and how I view them, I don't really trust much of what we see stat wise for young prospects. I think that anything prior to full season ball needs to be taken with a massive grain of salt. And even then, full season ball, it really depends upon how old the prospect was and what league they're in and what all these different things. But absent all that, if you're just looking at the actual stats, I think that for me, plate discipline, looking at the strikeout to walk ratio, on Fangraphs, they do have swinging strike rate, which the accuracy of it is it's pretty. I do trust it for the most part. I think swing strike rate is somewhat instructive, but I think the issue with swing strike rate is it's how many times they swing and miss. Well, all right, it's different than whiff rate, right? Whiff rate is a superior stat because that's simply just how many times they swing and miss per pitch. Now, swing and strike rate is how many times they swing and miss per swing. So, players who are incredibly aggressive are going to have lower. Sorry, they are going to have higher swing and strike. No. I'm sorry, but it does mess with it. So, just be mindful of it. Players that are incredibly patient are going to have lower swinging strike rates than they may otherwise have, just because they're not swinging as much. And players that are, players that are incredibly, someone like Luis Robert is going to have a higher swinging strike rate than accurately portrays his ability to make contact. So it's whiff rate because he just swings at everything. Same thing there's a lot of players like that. So whiff rate's more accurate. Unfortunately, you're not going to see a lot of that stat for young players, for prospects, for minor leaguers. But that would be a stat I would target when you're looking at major leaguers versus swinging strike rate. Now, like I said, I think walk versus strikeout rate is probably the most important all the way up. If you're seeing players striking out a lot in like rookie ball, that's a big red flag for me. Absent some loud tools, which can only a lot of times you only can really find through scouting reports, because the numbers just don't tell you what. A lot of these rookie ball leagues have short fields, they have small fences. Like the guys, just anybody with any power is going to hit homers there, and some of the pitching's so poor that anyone with talent's going to, or anyone with legit talent, even a lot of these players who perform really well in rookie ball may make it up to like AA, which is fantastic. I mean, that's a really difficult level to play at. They may make it AAA. I mean, those are very difficult places and environments to hit, but it's not the majors. So you're looking for that impact major leaguer, then you can't really focus on the stats in the lower level. And I just do not trust it at all. Obviously, if a player with big loud scouting report puts up big loud stats, that's something that's going to turn heads, like Marco Luciano, for example. But really, when it comes to lower levels, you want to try and just track down as many scouting reports as possible. Try and track down video of it when you can. Track down people who have seen them. And obviously, like I said, the stats can be a guide, but really it's about how the age of the prospect versus the level they're at. If it's a really young player competing at a level like an 18-year-old competing against a bunch of 22, 23-year-olds, and they're performing, even if it's not like really loud, that matters. So that matters more than actual stats they're putting up. So loud stats, just beware of it.
Yeah, so I'd say the value bomb that Jesse's dropping there is the way to not do your dynasty fantasy baseball draft prep is to go export a bunch of stats from Fangraphs and pick the guy who led his league in home runs. You definitely want to contextualize everything, and you'd be much better off just hanging out in the chats at Baseball Prospectus or going on YouTube and saying, Marco Luciano batting practice and checking out that to get a feel for what you're actually potentially drafting.
Yeah, and there's also some fun stats. I know Prospect Lives puts out some really interesting ones like average estimated fly ball distance. Um, you know, again, I wouldn't take any of it as like gospel, but it's interesting. Like that is interesting to measure, an interesting measure of a player's power. And again, it needs to be taken within context as well. Like all of this just needs to be taken within context. Like a player is a Rockies prospect and they're in Asheville, which is their low A affiliate, and they are going crazy, hitting tons of power. You just realize that Asheville is maybe one of the smallest parks in all of affiliated minor league baseball, with just a short, I believe, right field fence. It's also in Asheville, which is an elevated. It has a high elevation. So just be aware of the context in which all these stats are produced and the age of the prospect that's producing the stats. And always have the scouting report fallback. You may not have it every time, especially for a lot of like really young players. There just might not be much information out there that's publicly accessible, but do what you can to try and find it. And obviously we will try to provide what we can within the community when we discover it.
So, Jesse, how are you going to go about weighing the likelihood of repeat performances from our studs and duds from this shortened season? So, on the dud side, maybe JD Martinez, you already alluded to him with his lack of video this year. Maybe Chris Bryant, who never got going. And then for our short season studs, like a Mike Yastrzemski or a Teoscar Hernandez, who, both of them have been around a while, and Teoscar certainly looked like a superstar this year. So how are you going to go about incorporating into rankings what would otherwise just be a couple of hot months, maybe contextualized by cold months that followed it, versus that being a legitimate breakout? And the same thing for the proven players that just couldn't find their groove this year.
Yeah, I think this shortened season is really going to complicate things because not very often are you going to be basing big value judgments on a sample this small. Even if a player comes in for a short season, right? They come in like in June. They come in June and finish out the season. It depends on like the scouting grades of these players. If they're prospects, usually will be prospects who come in June, and even before that you'll have like a mountain of data of what they had been doing before, in the minor leagues, and a lot of reports, because if they're making the majors, there's going to be a lot of eyes on these players before they even get there. So there's a massive gap in information this year, and the information we have about prospects, I'm going to get back to these players, but information we have about prospects is really limited because for a lot, it's really just going to be about the players who are at the alternative site. And then it's just, word of mouth from people who've actually had eyes on these players. And that's just really problematic. I know that, at Baseball Prospectus, we like to have writers and scouts at Baseball Prospectus with eyes on each of these players at games, in many games. And it's just really complicating things and how everyone's working throughout the industry. Now, for certain players this year that have struggled, you have to look at context as well. Okay, did they contract COVID at some point? Was there what may have influenced their performance in a negative way? And I think it's going to be very easy to make excuses for bad performance this year, because you're going to be like, oh, well, it was a weird preseason, because they built up in March and then, February, March, and then the season got delayed. And then what did they do during their time off? And then they had the brief, they had the summer training, which was extremely brief and expedited. And then they get thrown to the fire. And, some of them contracted COVID. Yohan Moncada, who struggled this year. How are we assessing him moving forward? I think it's dangerous to dock too many of these players, absent some other significant red flag. So if you're seeing a player with a massively spiked whiff rate, someone like Keston Hiura, for example, whose whiff rate jumped over 40%, that's a problem. Last year we saw his whiff rate over 30%, and that was kind of like scary, but it could have been written off a little bit from a rookie and the short sample, right? His short sample last year was bigger than his sample this year, and then it's just like, okay, well, with that 40% strikeout rate, it's a short sample. How much weight are we going to give it? It's really difficult to measure it, but I mean, you have to give it weight. It is a small sample, but even small samples can have meaning. They can be meaningful to a point. So, if it means docking his potential hit tool, his future hit tool, or however you end up assessing these players, if you dock it by like a grade or a half grade, however you decide to measure it, I think that's something that's safe to do. But it's just then meanwhile for players like Teoscar Hernandez, he's the same player he's always been. He still whiffs a ton. He's still an atrocious defender. He was on a massive heater this year. I mean, he's always had the tools. He's always had massive power. He just was getting to more of that power this year, making better contact when he made contact. But the contact issues are still there. And yeah, like Yastrzemski, it's similar in a way too. Like, he kind of did start to show, the cracks around the edges toward the end there, right? He had a slow down toward the end. And if we had a few more months, that his numbers may have stabilized a bit more into, and you have to try and notice those trends. I hate looking at StatCast as like a guide too much, but StatCast is incredibly important, I think, in terms of analyzing this short season sample, because it does give us gives us additional data points to assess performance, and some of which are telling. But I think it's going, like I said, I think it's going to be incredibly easy to find excuses for underperformance or overperformance this year, and always say just small sample size, we can't really jump to conclusions on it. And I think it's really going to be interesting to see what happens in this coming year and who finds success analyzing this shortened season and seeing what actually is sustainable. And I've been diving into it player by player. I think for pitchers, it'll be easier because you're going to have a lot of information pitch by pitch. For hitters, it's just going to be harder. Someone like Victor Robles, I'll just give him as an example. His speed fell off a cliff. He gained like 25 pounds of pure muscle. He just got too big. Dude got too big, and his flexibility just was shot. His entire game fell apart. And also he's had mental issues as well throughout his young career. So, what will happen to him in this coming season? I assume he's going to come out in the best shape of his life, right? Like everyone does in the spring, and with less weight, hopefully more speed. But until we actually get clocks on him in spring training, we aren't really going to know where he's at. So
it's hard. What I'm hearing is that it's going to be hard.
It's going to be hard. It's harder than normal, that's for sure.
Yeah, and at least at the major league level, we had something to look at. So maybe that ends up being more noise and more problematic than nothing. But at the minor league level, we literally got nothing. So we got no statistics, we got no development, And so I'm curious, we've developed these rules of thumb that, okay, I expect this prospect to go a level a year. I expect that he'll come into his power roughly around here. I expect that he'll grow into his body roughly around there. So now that we got no baseball statistics and no progression up through the ranks, how do you expect that playing into prospect maturation as well as dynasty valuation?
I think it's a massive problem for both. I think that there are people who have gotten a lot of information from the alternative sites. And even then, the number of prospects that are actually at the alternative sites are limited. So we're going to have, there will be some players that we basically have close to zero information that's publicly available, or not necessarily publicly, but, absent people within the organization, there will be no information about certain players. And all we'll have is the prior year. And I think, for those players, you just simply have to approach it. You have to try and seek out what little information you can find. Look for it on Twitter, look for it through Google, just try and find as much information. If you know certain industry writers who may have an in on that organization, try and reach out and see what information they have, if any. They just may not have much of anything. Some of these players, during COVID, went back home to some of which went to squalid conditions, we had, this is not necessarily an on point thing here, but Shane Baz, for example, was on the 5-Tool podcast early on. I believe it would have been in April. Great guy, very intelligent young player with the Rays organization, a pitcher, a former first-round pick of the Pirates. And he was talking about how he had to try to create his own home gym because he didn't have access to schools, because they were all closed. He didn't have access to professional facilities, because all these players were sent home, and then a lot of different minor league players were communicating about ways to work at home, try and maintain and work out at home. There was a video, I think, floating around at one point of Grayson Rodriguez throwing a ball over a lake or something. Players were getting really creative, and meanwhile, I'm sure that there were some players who didn't. Really suffered from not having a structure of a professional organization and work environment that these organizations provide. And it's really hard to tell who these are. It's going to be, I think, for many of these players, we just kind of have to go off what we had prior to 2020, and just pay really close attention to what comes out in the spring and where players are going to be assigned. That will be late March. That information will be starting to come out, and even then, it's just be on the lookout for the newest reports you can find. Even the newest tweet about a player. Some of those, sometimes tweets can carry a lot of valuable insight or information. Sometimes you can find video that you may not otherwise find. I mean, if there was ever a time for the video scout, it's this time. we aren't able to see these players in live. Most of us. So I'm sure we're going to see some. It's going to be really difficult trying to assess these minor leaguers moving forward, other than the limited information we have. But for the fantasy owners, dynasty owners out there, be proactive about trying to find information about players. At sites like Baseball Prospectus, we're putting out our top 10 prospect list right now. Sites like Prospects Live, they do excellent work. I've been pushing them, but then there's Fangraphs, they do great work too. Just try and get information from as many different resources as possible, and see if you can find people that share similar opinions about players, and how they all have the same source that says something about a player at an alternative site, and that can be something that that you have, that information that you then have that other owners in your league don't. So, really the big thing about dynasty leagues is hustling.
Mm-hmm.
You got to get out there and get that as much information as possible, and try and get those advantages over your opponents.
Yeah, I think I couldn't agree more. So now we're going to lightning round these next couple questions I have here. I'm keeping you longer than I intended to, so I appreciate your patience
I'm
here.
talking a lot. I'm sorry.
No, you're doing great. It's been action packed in terms of information here, but we'll go quickly here with these next 9 questions, and you can just rattle off the answer and maybe a one little liner on the why. And then we'll try to get you out of here at a reasonable hour tonight. So who's a non-top 100 guy that you think everyone should be trying to get in their dynasty league?
Heriberto Hernandez, who's a utility prospect for the Rangers. He's been dabbling at catcher, first base, in the outfield. He hasn't even hit full season ball. The guy has massive power, and he can hit. I believe in that bat. I think that's going to be a special bat. He's a little older for his levels, and he's not a very good defender, so he's not going to be ranked high on most actual real life prospect lists. But for fantasy and dynasty, I think he's someone you should try and target. He's not going to be on anybody's top 100, even in dynasty, just yet, I don't think. And he should be readily available in a lot of leagues. In deeper leagues, he may already be rostered, but his costs may not, really be very high. So you should maybe try and get him in there, get him as a kicker, or get him for cheap.
Favorite prospect of all time, regardless of how they succeeded in the Major League Baseball?
So I have a national shirt on here, but I grew up an Orioles fan. I'm still an Orioles fan. I'm one of those dual fandoms. We can do it. They're in different leagues. When they face each other, it gets a little complicated. But as an Orioles fan growing up, I was just super excited about Jeffrey Hammonds. Didn't really work out for him. He was, I believe, 4th overall pick way back in like 92 or something. And that was like 7, 8. So really starting to get into baseball and following it at that point in my life. And I was really excited about Jeffrey Hammonds. A lot of excitement around him, and unfortunately, his career just never really took off. He had a couple, he flashed his potential at times. I think he had a nice little stint with Colorado one year, but knee injuries and just injuries just destroyed his career.
Favorite prospect right now? Don't say Wander Franco.
Nah, Wander Franco, he's too easy.
Yeah.
My favorite prospect right now, I'm trying to think of someone I've seen lately or saw last year. Wow, it's so long ago. That I really thought was a lot of fun, and I think it's going to be quite good.
Christian Robinson.
Christian Robinson's a lot of fun. He's going to be good. Not my favorite right now. I'm going to say Casey Mize. I know he struggled in his debut, but man, I saw him in college a bunch, and I just really believe in his stuff. I think that the only real weakness in my mind for him long term from his stuff is his fastball, which is a problem. He throws fast, he throws hard. He throws 93, 95, but it doesn't. It gets hit too much. He doesn't. It doesn't have a ton of movement, and but man, his cutter and his splitter, split finger. I mean, those are just awesome pitches, and his slider is very good too. It's just and when he's on, his command is almost unrivaled. I think he can hit any spot. I do believe in him still, and I think it's a good time to buy because his values for some people may have completely tanked given his debut.
Who's the one guy that hit in the pros that you were first with, or you were among the bleeding edge of people touting them as potentially a prospect that could really make some noise at the major league level?
So, I've only been doing the prospect game or writing for Dynasty Guru since 2018. So, um, the amount of time for me publicly talking about these prospects is limited. But a player that I've just steadfastly stuck to through his struggles was Luis Robert.
Mm-hmm.
I always had him in my top 25. He never dropped out of that, even with his struggles, just because I believe in those tools. I always have believed in those tools. I do think he's going to have a tough learning curve just because of his approach. But I think that his the pure raw ability will carry through. I mean, we saw him hit the beginning of what may be a real sophomore slump toward the end of the year this year. I mean, I think there are holes in his offensive game, but his power speed combo is crazy if he really clicks. And I do think that he'll hit enough to be, a legit potential superstar.
What rule changes implemented this year would you like to see become permanent?
Well, the National League DH, of course. I mean,
of course, a fantasy guy would say that.
more fantasy usefulness from that. I think that's the for sure one. I actually think the 3-batter minimum is a rule I kind of like. It helps speed up the game. It takes some strategy out, which is tough. I mean, the thing is, with all these new rule changes to the DH, you're going to be sacrificing something for these rule changes that traditionalists will not be fond of. But really, it's about the future of the game here. And I think that the DH and the NL and the 3-batter rule are things that I think are probably here to stay. I know that DH hasn't been officially sanctioned for the 2021 season. But, I just have trouble seeing that not happening. It's a very player-friendly thing. It's giving more players jobs. And that's only a good thing. And it makes the game, I mean, who really wants to see pitchers hit? I mean,
right.
Only sadists want to see that. So, the days of Greg Maddux and Tom Glavine are behind us. I want to see that NLDH. It just gives more players jobs, and gives us fantasy and dynasty owners more usable assets.
How would you change the game to make it better for TV, or would you not?
I think that the times that they've experimented with StatCast and giving that kind of information through telecast is, I think, been a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed seeing that. And I think that's interesting. I think that'd be interesting for audiences to get more engaged in the game. Otherwise, I don't think there should be too many other changes, because you're also it's not just that you're influencing the how you're televising the game, but you're influencing how the game's watched, on the field, and people that are actually at the game. I don't think the time between innings should be shortened. I think they're doing a lot of things now, like the count, like the clock for pitchers, doing a lot of things that help speed it up and help get rid of some of the hangups that make baseball a tough one to watch for some people. But for the telecast, I think it's just about giving more interesting information and color to the game. One thing I do not think they should do is give players mics. That needs to stop. That needs to stop. That's ridiculous. But other than that, I think, just make the telecast more interesting. We don't need to hear these color commentators talking about random stuff. Just give us more information about the actual game and what's happening. Talk about the players. Give fans the scouting experience. Talk about a pitcher, talk about what pitches they have and how their pitches move. Do all that stuff, and you can do that between pitches, and fill the time with interesting information that fans may not otherwise have.
Who's the best player you've ever seen, either in person or on TV?
In person, I saw a lot of Mike Mussina growing up. and actually was out in Seattle at one point on a road trip, and went to Safeco pretty early on, and they have their bullpens. You can just go right up to the bullpen and like watch the pitcher right there and watch them warm up. And I got to do that with my, and that was just very cool. And I just thought he was just awesome, an awesome pitcher, commanding. And obviously, I also was a fan of Greg Max growing up. It's hard not to be, as an born 1985, grew up through the 90s. So the Braves were still, even if I was an Orioles fan, the Braves were somebody, now I'm a Nationals fan, but the Braves were a team I liked to follow and I really liked. And that pitching staff was just a lot of fun. So watching Greg Max as well was just a blast. The guy was an artist. And so Maddox and Mussina were just, they were just super fun pitchers. I mean, I guess I can understand why I became a pitcher down the line. They were just a lot of fun.
Absolutely. So final question for you, Jesse. What is important for you to accomplish with what remains of this perfect team game cycle?
Well, I want to stay in Perfect League. I want to win Perfect League, ideally. Although, it's tough. 16 teams make the playoffs in Perfect League. It's a 40-team league. And making the playoffs alone is an accomplishment, I think.
Mm-hmm. Completely agree.
So, you won Perfect League. I mean, hell, that is awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I think that's my main goal. But I think I want to try to take advantage of these final missions. And I'm probably not going to do any speculating. I mean, I think that Chris kind of showed his hand a little with this last missions that maybe it might be difficult to speculate on these because there was a lefty pitcher mission.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, for an achievements, right? The Carlton mission. So I think that it may be difficult to predict some of these achievement missions. I think there are some that I'm sure will happen. And if they happen, they'll be somewhat predictable. But even still, I'd like to, try and target the bigger cards from those missions and to build my roster. But I haven't even finished the postseason mission, so that's my next big step. I need to get Mo. It's hard to survive in Perfect without Mo right now.
Yep, I can agree with that. So Jesse, why don't you tell us where people can find your work and follow you on social, and then we'll close it up.
Sure. Obviously, you can find me at Baseball Prospectus. Also, please follow and listen to the 5-Tool Fantasy Baseball podcast presented by Fantrax with me, Eric Cross, and Jake Devereaux. We record weekly, although we have been off the last 2, but we should be back at it this week. And we record on Wednesday and release on Thursday. At least for now. That may change, but please follow. It's an awesome podcast. We give a lot of great information. I like to think Eric and Jake are incredibly knowledgeable and they're excellent fantasy owners. I'm in a league with Jake, and I know he's in a few others where he just finds great success, and he's a great dynasty fantasy owner. So please listen to that podcast. You can find me at Twitter at JAROCHE6. Give me a follow. I haven't been as active as I need to be this off season and this entire season in general, but that's going to change, and I'll be pretty active on Twitter coming up, and especially during the season. So, give me a follow. At the very least, I will not be clogging your Twitter feed with a bunch of stuff. So, the things I like to post are going to hopefully be meaningful to you. So, give me a follow. And, obviously, if you have any questions, Dynasty related, hell, if it's Perfect Team related, you can message me on Twitter, private message me. You can reach out to me on Discord through, the OOTP's Discord. My username on OOTP is Jesse_Roche, ROCHE. So yeah, I mean, obviously, reach out to DRC Nomads. I've reached out to him. I've asked him a bunch of stuff. He has tons of valuable information he's readily willing to share. So, use your resources wisely. For Perfect Team and for Dynasty, because again, the industry for baseball in general and for Dynasty baseball is very giving. Like, they will help you. So it never hurts to reach out. I wish I'd reached out for Perfect Team way earlier. Way earlier. I only joined Discord like a month ago. So, take advantage of your resources to, make the best of, whatever game you're playing.
Well, thank you so much tonight, Jesse, for going a little longer than we had planned. I certainly appreciate the insights you've been able to share, and now I'm actually jacked up and ready for fantasy baseball season to come around in just a couple short months.
And fantasy baseball season for Dynasty is happening now. You got to be, a lot of people are trading. I have a draft, a poacher's draft in a industry score sheet league that starts on Monday. And I have the first pick. I'm going to be taking Yohan Moncada. You heard it here first, everybody.
Breaking news.
I believe in him. So, I mean, Dynasty never ends, never sleeps. So, be ready to trade. I mean, some leagues may not really start going until January, which is fine. But, a lot of great information is dropping right now. And so, go get that information. Try to figure out a strategy for your team for the upcoming season, and get ready to hustle. Reach out to your opponents and engage in trade conversations as early as now. So get going.
Well, thanks again, Jesse.
Thanks, man. Great to be on.
And we're back. So that was Jesse Roche, and I really appreciated that interview. It was probably our least PT-centric interview that we've ever had. It was almost undoubtedly our least PT-centric interview we've ever had. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. I'm going to go ahead and open up the giveaway now. So that should pop open right now. And it did. So type !ticket into the chat and you will be entered into the giveaway. I'm going to draw 3 winners. Each of those 3 winners will receive 10,000 perfect points. And the way to get those perfect points is to DM me on Discord with your Out of the Park Perfect Team username with the exactly correct capitalization. So once I draw winners, if you happen to be one of them, go ahead and DM me and we'll get you those points right away. I want to thank Jesse Roche for joining me, going super long on a Sunday night with me as we talked all sorts of stuff, Perfect Team related, Dynasty Fantasy Baseball related, prospecting related, kind of sprayed to all fields, but I had a great time. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it too. And I'm not opposed to, as we even get closer to fantasy season, doing a little bit more of this. Fantasy baseball and Dynasty Fantasy Baseball is certainly near and dear to my heart, and I can't talk enough about it. So if there's an appetite for it, even if it's for a separate show or something entirely different than what we regularly do now, I'd be certainly open to that. Make sure you do check out Jesse's work. So Baseball Prospectus, he dropped the podcast link of the podcast that he's on, and just some really good work out there and some really good assets. And as I'm doing my prep work for my drafts every year, I'm getting an absolute heavy dose of podcasts, of which Jesse's is one of them, of Baseball Prospectus insights, of which Jesse is delivering many of them as well. So definitely can't recommend that enough. And then just in general, if you listen to this because you listen to these shows and you expect Perfect Team content, and maybe your appetite was a bit whetted by what we were discussing tonight, or maybe you have a lingering interest in playing some Dynasty Fantasy, feel free to DM me or Jesse on the Discord. Honestly, transitioning my fantasy baseball league over to the Dynasty format 8 years ago was one of the best things that I've ever done. It has resulted in a way more rewarding, way more fun, way more challenging, and way more competitive environment for my home league. And it's just so worth it. It just takes it to 11 from where it is now, where redraft to me, redraft fantasy baseball is somewhere around like a 3 or a 4. All right, let's draw some winners here. I'm going to close it in 5 seconds, so exclamation point ticket if you haven't done it yet. In 2, 1, giveaway closed. Here we go. Time to draw some winners. First winner is Chuck8403. Can't think of anyone more deserving. Next is Vulcan2139, and last but not least is RB Stens. So DM me on the Discord and we will get you that as soon as possible. Giveaway complete and closed. All right, so what are we doing next week? Who is going to be my next guest? Well, as I was weighing this decision and as I was trying to see who I could wrangle into this, I noticed, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, that there are only 2 people, and someone was even alluding to this in the chat earlier in this show tonight, that there are only 2 people in Perfect Team that have not only been able to win Perfect League, but have been able to win it more than once. And one of them is Mac Jex, and he was on episode 2 of Reading Between the Lineups. And the other one is a gentleman by the name of Jay Mallett, better known in Perfect Team lexicon as the Greenwich Time Lords. And they picked up their second Perfect League championship, Perfect League World Series victory last week. And he's going to be my guest next week. He's a member of BFF. He is someone who's an excellent resource on many different things, with specializations in pitching deployment, lineup optimization, market speculation. So I imagine we'll cover all of that and more next week. So make sure you don't miss it. Next broadcast will be in 2 days from now. So Thursday, we will do our regularly scheduled This Week in Perfect Team, where Kidneys and I will go through all the new content. We'll talk about the new missions that have dropped. We'll have some fun, and we'll give away some more perfect points, so make sure you don't miss that. And then Sunday, as I dropped at the top of the show, we're moving on up to the mothership. I will be broadcasting on the Out of the Park channel for the very first time on Sunday. Drops will be enabled. It'll be a nice, long, data-driven World Series broadcast, so make sure you check that out and have some fun with us. So with that, we're going to close down the show for tonight, but thank you all for showing up. Thank you for the support. Chuck, thank you for gifting 5 subscriptions to the chat. Thank you for those that dropped some bits in there. I see Walnut on the top of that list. And as always, just thanks for the general support of the stream. And with that, I'm out of here.